the Ethiopian church took all of this literature, which included literature that nobody considered scripture at the time, and they appear to have just been non-discretionary and included everything.
For 60 years, a monk named Abate has lived in solitude at Debre Damo, a remote hilltop monastery in Ethiopia, without electricity or contact with the outside world. He possesses an ancient manuscript known as the Mashafa Kedane, Book of the Covenant, which is said to predate many existing copies of the New Testament. Before his death, he reveals to his two disciples, Brother Johannes and Deacon Mikkel, the three hidden teachings of Jesus Christ, which, according to him, the Church had concealed from the world for 2,000 years. Tonight, we follow the path into one of the world's most isolated Christian traditions to discover why the final words of an Ethiopian monk are suddenly raising questions that few Western churches seem willing to address. He never preached from the manuscript. He never quoted its words. He never allowed it to leave its chamber. Then, on the final night of his life, as the candle burned low and his disciples listened in silence, the elderly man on the cliff, Brother Johannes, is the one holding the basin. He is 26 years old. He has lived inside Debre Damo for 9 years. Yet in all that time, he has never seen the old man's hands shake the way they are shaking tonight. Beside him, Deacon Mikkel, older and more composed, avoids looking directly at the manuscript resting on the goatskin cover. The pages are made of vellum. The writing is Ge'ez, Ethiopia's sacred language, believed by many to be the language of angels. Abate's eyes are clouded by cataracts that have slowly worsened over the past decade. His fingertips are stained dark from 60 years of dipping a reed pen into iron gall ink. He can no longer read the page before him. He doesn't need to. He has studied this manuscript every day since he was 31 years old. He knows it the way a heartbeat knows its own rhythm. And this manuscript is unlike anything you have ever encountered. It is older than most surviving copies of the New Testament. It is one of perhaps only 3 known volumes still left in the world. What it contains is the reason a frail old man on a cliff in northern Ethiopia is spending the final night of his life preparing to do something that 30 generations of monks before him refused to do. He is going to speak. Here is the truth that many people raised in Western Christianity were never told. Your Bible is not the complete Bible. The Western canon was set at 66 books. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved 81. The Book of Enoch, removed by Rome, tells of 200 watcher angels who descended to Mount Hermon, took human wives, and gave rise to the Nephilim. Shemyaza, Azazel, Barachiel, every one of them is named in its pages. Rome removed it. Ethiopia preserved it. But Enoch is not the reason Abate is trembling on his deathbed. The real focus is what Jesus truly said. The book resting on the goatskin cover is called the Mashafa Kedane, the Book of the Covenant, and the man who has protected it for 60 years believes that what is written inside explains why much of what the modern world calls Christianity was built on a crucial period of teaching that was almost completely removed. Look closely at what the Western Gospels actually record. The 40 days between the resurrection and the ascension, the most significant teaching period in the entire faith, are summarized in Luke with only a handful of verses. Jesus appears. He blesses the disciples. He ascends. 40 days, one short passage, almost no explanation. The most important teaching window in Christian history was handed to you as though the pages had been left empty. The Mashafa Kedane fills in that missing page. According to the text Abate is opening tonight, the risen Christ did not return simply to comfort his disciples. He returned the way a commander gathers his closest officers just before everything begins to fall apart. He came back with a warning, and the very first thing he said, the very first sentence, was a message that should have appeared on the opening page of every Bible ever printed. Do not build temples of stone, for stone will fall apart. Build the temple of the heart, for it lasts forever. Read those words carefully. This is not poetic encouragement. It is a direct warning against the very system that would later rise in his name. He goes even further. He foretells men dressed in long robes who would use his name to gather wealth. He warns of a future empire that would take his cross and turn it into a weapon. Crusades, inquisitions, towering cathedrals built on the suffering of the poor. He tells his disciples without hesitation that a true believer must remain separate from the systems created by men. Brother Johannes hears the next sentence and freezes. If what you are feeling right now is your understanding beginning to shift, that is exactly what Abate experienced when he first read these words at the age of 31. Subscribe now, because the next teaching he is about to reveal is the one the monks always believed was the most dangerous of the three. It is the teaching that, if it had ever been copied and spread throughout the Roman Empire, would have made every organized church on earth lose its authority overnight. And the reason it remained hidden will teach you more about the nature of power than almost any history lesson ever could. Two winds. He pauses. The candle flickers. Deacon Meikle leans in closer. Abate begins speaking once more. What he describes next sounds less like traditional theology and more like a guide to the inner life. Every human being, he says, carries two winds moving within them at every moment: the wind of life and the wind of error. The wind of error is not simply another word for sin. It is described as a parasite, precise, deliberate, with clear points of entry. It enters through greed. It enters through the eyes when they linger where they should not. It enters through the mouth when it speaks lies. And once it takes hold, it does not merely make someone darker. It hardens the heart. It seals the inner life until a person becomes what the text calls, without softening the meaning, a walking grave. Someone who wakes, eats, works, sleeps, and rises again while their inner world has already grown cold. The walking grave. That image has remained hidden on this mountain for nearly 2,000 years. Almost no one outside these walls even knows it exists. But after revealing the sickness, Christ offers the cure. And that cure is not a sacrament. It is not a ritual. It is not belonging to any institution. He calls it knowledge, direct personal knowledge of the truth that requires no middleman, no priest, no bishop standing between a human soul and the divine. He teaches them to watch their own thoughts the way a guard watches the entrance to a city, aware of what comes in and aware of what goes out. Then he says it. The kingdom of heaven is literally within the human body, hidden in the silence between thoughts. If ordinary people across the Roman Empire had truly embraced that message, they would have stopped paying temple taxes. They would have stopped fearing excommunication. They would have stopped depending on the machinery of religion to shape their relationship with the divine. They would have become, in the language of every empire that has ever ruled, completely impossible to control. This is why the Mashafa Kedane had to disappear. This is what Abate spent 60 years making sure would survive. But the most dangerous teaching, the one he has still not spoken aloud, is yet to come. The warning they kept hidden. Brother Johannes asks the old monk if he wants water. He quietly shakes his head. His breathing has become slower and shorter. The candle is burning lower far too quickly. He looks at the two men before him and tells them that what comes next is the passage the monks have always protected more carefully than any other. In the Mashafa Kedane, the risen Christ looks directly at his disciples, the same men who had watched him die and then return. And he says something that is neither comfort nor gentle prophecy. The darkness will come, and it will wear my face. Not a monster appearing in the shadows. Not an obvious enemy. But a deception so perfect, so carefully designed that it would look exactly like him. It would speak in his name. It would carry his cross. It would raise great cathedrals in his honor. It would print his words inside the very book it would use to control people. And understand this clearly, it would become the very instrument of spiritual destruction that everything he had taught was meant to stop. In this text, the Antichrist is not a future ruler sitting on a throne. It is a system, an institution wearing the image of the very man it betrayed. And for nearly 2,000 years, the monks of Debre Damo have believed this passage was never about something still to come. It was describing something already present. Abate has read those words more than 10,000 times, and tonight, for the first time, he believes the world has finally reached the moment they were meant for. The Westerner who came closest. There is one Western scholar who nearly reached it. His name is Jacques Mercier. He is a French ethnologist who spent decades working with the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in Paris. In the late 1990s, Ethiopian authorities trusted him to authenticate the Garima Gospels, beautifully illustrated Christian manuscripts later dated by radiocarbon testing to between AD 330 and 650. They are among the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts ever discovered anywhere in the world. While Europe passed through the Dark Ages, Ethiopia's monasteries remained hidden inside mountain fortresses, preserving an ancient form of Christianity untouched, unchanged, and never approved by Rome. Mercier personally handled the Garima Gospels. He later spoke about the moment he first touched them, the silence filling the room, the trembling in his own hands, and the realization that the manuscripts before him existed long before many of the traditions he had always believed were authoritative. The Mashafa Kedane has been examined only in fragments by a very small number of Western scholars. Several of them privately described experiencing the same reaction Mercier felt while studying the Garima Gospels, a strange sense of vertigo as though everything they believed they understood was shifting beneath their feet. That feeling is what Abate has carried with him every single day since 1965. He has built his entire life around it, and what he is about to reveal to Brother Johannes and Deacon Michael during the next 40 minutes is not even the most dangerous thing in the room. The greatest danger is what lies hidden beneath the ground below them, the ark beneath the stone. For 3,000 years, Ethiopia has never changed its claim that the Ark of the Covenant is here, kept inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in the ancient city of Aksum. Not as legend, not as symbolism, but as a real object guarded there even now. The account appears in the Debre Nagast, Ethiopia's royal chronicle. The Queen of Sheba travels to Jerusalem. She meets Solomon. She returns to Ethiopia carrying his son, Menelik I. Years later, when Menelik returns to visit his father, Solomon offers him the throne of Israel. Menelik declines, but he does not return home empty-handed. Together with his companions, he replaces the ark inside the Holy of Holies with a replica and carries the original back to Africa. According to the biblical accounts, the ark destroyed armies with fire. It struck people dead when they touched it without permission. It released flames that seemed impossible to explain naturally. When some scholars read these descriptions as technical observations instead of mythology, the reported effects sound remarkably similar to an object producing continuous radiation. Then comes the detail that is difficult to ignore. There is only one guardian at any given time. He is chosen, enters the chapel, and never leaves again for the rest of his life. Visitors who have observed generations of these guardians have noticed the same pattern. Failing eyesight, cataracts appearing unusually early, skin slowly becoming pale, death arriving sooner than expected. These are not the ordinary effects of a life devoted to prayer. They resemble the effects of long-term exposure to something that emits powerful energy. If the object were only a wooden chest covered with gold, none of these things should happen. None of them. The Knights Templar traveled into Ethiopia during the 12th century with the specific goal of finding it, not as pilgrims, but as seekers. Their carved symbols can still be seen inside the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. They eventually returned home without the ark. Ethiopia also stands alone among African nations in never being permanently colonized. When Italy invaded in 1896 with modern weapons and the strength of a European empire behind them, they were defeated at the Battle of Adwa, the churches that should not exist. Abate visited Lalibela only once in his entire life. He was 29 years old. It became the memory he returned to more than any other during his 60-year watch, because Lalibela seems impossible. King Debre Lalibela did not build 11 churches in the usual way. He carved them downward into solid volcanic rock. Entire cathedrals, windows, doorways, columns, hidden chambers, and advanced drainage systems were all shaped from single unbroken masses of stone. They were not assembled. They were carved directly from the heart of the mountain. This is not a method that allows mistakes. A cracked column carved from solid rock cannot simply be repaired. Every measurement, every structural decision, Every hidden chamber had to exist perfectly in the architect's mind before the first strike of the chisel. Modern structural engineers have studied these buildings. Their estimates suggest that carving all 11 churches with 12th century tools would have required nearly 40,000 skilled workers laboring continuously for well over a century. Yet history credits the entire project to roughly 24 years. The numbers simply do not match. And there is another mystery. The millions of tons of volcanic rock that had to be removed are nowhere to be found. No massive debris field, no quarry, no evidence showing where the stone went. The rock once existed. The churches remain. The missing stone does not. For generations, the monks have given the same explanation. Human workers carved during the daylight hours. At night, the ancient texts say, angels descended and continued the work using tools of light that passed through solid rock without friction. That is more than a simple legend. It is a description written with remarkable precision. The most famous of all 11 churches is the Church of St. George, a perfect cross carved straight down into the earth until its roof sits level with the surrounding ground. Beneath the entire complex stretches a network of completely dark tunnels where future priests are sent alone to find their way, using only touch, sound, and constant prayer. The teachings of the Mashafa Kedane are carved directly into the architecture itself. You must first pass through darkness before receiving the light. Recent three-dimensional laser scans revealed hollow chambers beneath the floors that have remained sealed for nearly 8 centuries. The priests described them as the treasury of the saints, containing gold, ancient manuscripts, and perhaps even the original tools used to build the churches. No one has ever been given permission to open them. Abate believes he knows exactly what they contain, the bloodline they erased. In Western Christianity, Jesus is understood to have left no descendants. The story ends at the cross and continues in heaven. Any family line, if it ever existed, is considered either unimportant or theologically impossible. In Ethiopia, that silence is almost impossible to understand. The Solomonic dynasty ruled Ethiopia for nearly 3,000 years, from around 900 BC until 1974. One continuous royal bloodline. The last emperor, Haile Selassie, stood as the 225th ruler in that unbroken line. His official title was the Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah. This was not simply a poetic name, it was a legal declaration, a genealogical claim, a direct bloodline traced all the way back to King David himself. Here is where the story becomes even more intriguing. That lineage does not just connect Ethiopia to the Old Testament. It creates a genealogical link with the New Testament that mainstream Western theology has never fully explained. If Mary, the mother of Jesus, belonged to the house of David and Ethiopia's royal dynasty claimed the same bloodline for nearly 3,000 years, then Ethiopia's connection to Christ was not only spiritual, it was presented as family, literal, traceable, and biological. Then modern genetics entered the conversation. DNA research on Ethiopian populations has identified ancient genetic markers connected to the Levant, the region of present-day Israel and Syria, dating back roughly 3,000 years. Not a legendary migration, but a biological one. Real people leaving Jerusalem and settling in Ethiopia. According to this interpretation, the oral traditions were preserved not only in stories, but also within the genome itself. This also helps explain why Ethiopian Christianity looks so different from its Western form. The Saturday Sabbath is still observed. Circumcision on the 8th day continues to be practiced. Detailed Levitical dietary laws remain in place. The Ethiopian Church did not later adopt Jewish customs. It never gave them up, which leads to the idea Abate considers the most dangerous of them all. If Jesus survived the crucifixion, as certain ancient writings quietly suggest, and if he needed to disappear into a place that would protect him completely and never betray him to Rome, where would he go? What safer place could there be than a kingdom ruled by his own bloodline? In the remote highlands of Ethiopia, oral traditions speak of a teacher who came from the north, a healer, a man whose way of speaking was unlike anything the people had ever heard. They never call him Jesus. They simply call him the righteous teacher. No outside scholar has ever fully explained who this righteous teacher was. Abate, his eyes now closed and his lips quietly moving in Ge'ez, believes he knows the answer. And one saying preserved within the Ethiopian church for centuries carries the confidence of people convinced they are protecting something the rest of the world has forgotten. The West has the water. We have the well. Why now? Brother Johannes finally asks the question he has been afraid to speak all night. Why now? Why is Abate ending 60 years of silence on this particular night, in this particular room, with the candle almost gone? The old monk slowly opens his eyes, and the answer is already written inside the text. The Mashafa Kedane describes the conditions of the end times using a Ge'ez phrase that translates, as closely as possible, to webs of illusion. A world connected in every direction, yet deeply disconnected from truth. A place where people communicate without using their physical voices, where they see without using their own eyes, where information travels faster than truth itself, and where manufactured images replace lived experience. Think about that for a moment. Does it not sound remarkably similar to the internet, social media, and even the early development of artificial intelligence? The Ethiopian monastic tradition preserves a remarkable theory. The monks were not simply guarding ancient scripture, they were protecting a message meant to be released only at a specific moment in history, when the conditions described inside the Mashafa Kedane had clearly appeared in the world. The trigger was never a calendar date. The trigger was the description itself. And consider where we stand today. Public trust in governments has weakened. Trust in the media has declined. Confidence in organized religion is falling at one of the fastest rates in modern history. People everywhere are searching for something they cannot quite describe, something direct, personal, and untouched by institutions standing between them and the truth. The First Council of Nicaea in AD 325 did more than organize Christianity. According to the internal logic of the Ethiopian tradition, it carried out a deliberate spiritual disarmament. The books that disappeared were not removed because they lacked historical value. They were removed because they portrayed human beings as spiritually independent, able to reach the divine without priests standing in the middle. By removing those books, the institution also removed the reader's protection. Ethiopia never accepted that decision. Some passages of the Mashafa Kedane hardly sound like theology at all. They sound more like physics. Researchers have pointed to language describing what modern acoustics would recognize as resonant frequency manipulation, the precise use of sound to influence physical matter. Replace the word angels in the story of Lalibela with highly advanced acoustic technology, and suddenly the construction of those 11 churches no longer appears impossible. This is not simply a religious revelation, it is presented as the return of knowledge deliberately buried by people who understood both its power and the reason it had to remain hidden. And tonight, high on a cliff in northern Ethiopia, the man who has guarded the final copy knows his time is almost over. The last breath. The candle is nearly finished. Brother Johannes hears it clearly now, the faint rattle in the old man's chest. Tears fill Deacon Mickel's eyes, though he is not a man who cries. Abate's hand rests gently on the open pages of the Mashafa Kedane. His ink-darkened fingers remain still. Gathering the last of his strength, he tells them that the 3 teachings he has revealed are not theological mysteries. They are instructions for survival, written for people living inside manufactured realities while desperately searching for something genuine. The first teaching. Do not build temples of stone, for the stone will crumble. Build the temple of the heart, for it is eternal. No institution can save you. No building can contain the divine. Turn inward, or you will never find it. The second teaching. The kingdom of heaven is literally inside the human body, hidden in the silence between thoughts. What you have been searching for cannot be bought. It is not controlled by a bishop, a denomination, or membership in the right belief system. It already exists within you, in the quiet place where thought ends and something deeper begins. The third teaching. The final one, spoken almost in a whisper, as though even the walls might be listening. The darkness will come, and it will wear my face. He tells them this is the message he has protected for 60 years, not because it is the most mysterious, but because it is the most urgently practical. The deception Christ warned about, the force that would speak in his name while carrying his cross, was not something still approaching. It was already here, and the only protection against it was to remember the first two teachings. Go inward, find the silence. Never mistake the costume for the man. His breathing falters. Brother Johannes reaches out and takes his hand. Deacon Mikkel bows his head and begins chanting in Ge'ez, the sacred language believed to be spoken by angels. The candle flickers one final time, hisses softly, and goes dark. Abate dies with his head resting on the manuscript at 3:40 in the morning. The room is silent except for the cold blue moonlight pouring through the narrow window carved into the cliff. His disciples have carried those words with them ever since. And tonight, for the first time, you have heard them. The West has the water. We have the well. And after 2,000 years of silence, that well has finally been opened. If those three teachings spoke to something deep inside you, tell me which one in the comments. Was it the temple of the heart, the silence between thoughts, or the warning about the darkness wearing his face? Subscribe now, because Abate did not spend 60 years in silence only for the people who needed these words most to simply scroll past. What he spent his life protecting reaches far beyond what we have uncovered tonight, and the next chapter is one that most people are not yet ready to hear. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nature Mystery Unravel Mysteries. Learn untold tales of history and stay in the exciting world of new discoveries.